Now, the obvious story of the year is the election, but the story post-election has been the explosion in support for One Nation. Now, you've got to admire that Pauline Hanson, a political figure who has been around for the best part of 30 years, is now starting to have at the federal stage, which previously she had in Queensland, an absolute resurgence. So much so that people who are former Deputy Prime Ministers are willing to leave their party to join, to continue in the federal parliament, firstly as a One Nation MP in the lower house and then potentially into the Senate, depending on whether the people of New South Wales will vote for him. But then, of course, there were moments that supposedly were going to end all of the surge in support that has happened since the last election, including the moment in a burqa. Remember the outrage about that? This was the beginning of the end before the beginning had even started of a surge for One Nation.
It is the middle finger to people of faith.
Is to be this disrespectful.
But racism should not be the choice of the Senate.
Well, guess what? Kind of all the right people were pissed off, and that is why they are up again when it comes to the opinion polls. Latest one, this one comes via the Turnbull Times. They know they wrote about it there in the headline at news.com.au. Labor at 34, the Libs at 26. That's a horrible number for them. One Nation 17, easily outperforming the Greens. In fact, Greens and Tiffany Teals together, you end up with where One Nation is, 17, 10 and 7. The rest of it is undecided or other minor parties. Do you want to know where this support is coming from? Well, let me dig that in for you as well here, right? People between the ages of 35 and 54, all right? Upper-end millennials or Generation X. You can see there that the numbers are pretty amazing, where we are now, again, pushing very close to, 19, 20%. In those over the age of 55, 21%. 1 in 5 voters now backing One Nation. And there is a very gendered nature to this too. You see, 19% support amongst blokes and no such number, of course, when it comes to women. What's really interesting about this is that it confirms what we have told you before in other polling done by our mate Kos Samaras, which is that Generation X men, put simply between their 40s and 60s, or if you want to try to draw another demographic, say between 35 and 55, that it is blokes that are the ones that are moving towards One Nation. Now, I think this is going to be largely permanent. I think in the same way that a generation of people decided to cleaver themselves off towards the Greens, and then, yes, they sent their preferences back towards the Labor Party. And once that becomes a regular source, then it doesn't really matter what the primary vote is of the Liberal Party. You will know that most of the preferences will come in from One Nation. Now, obviously, at this stage, if that takes place, you still have, rather than 55-45, according to a news poll, it is more like 43 and 57 in favour of the Labor and the Greens and the Teals at the moment. So the overall right-wing pie has shrunk, but how it's being divvied up is really fascinating to see. Again, surprise, surprise, a group of people, and particularly blokes of a certain age group who have been hectored at, yelled at, told that everything that they think is toxic and evil, are amongst those that have made the big change to a party that likes to laugh at the political establishment. Have a look at those cartoons, that at times middle fingers the political establishment, and yes, sometimes even says publicly what some don't even have the courage to read in some of their private messaging groups. So there is a change, it is happening, and in the same way that women 35 to 55 walked away from the Liberal Party, blokes between, say, 45 to 55, or maybe even spin it down 35, 55. If you have neither of those people supporting you, you are, of course, in the world of trouble. But that is hardly breaking news this Wednesday night. Same poll, and interesting to note here how people have felt about their country, but also how they felt about Australia this year. Now, sometimes these polls deeply frustrate me because they don't match at all what happens in the news, what happens in our politics, and what happens when it comes to the common sense of the people that we are around. But of people who had their expectations of what this year was going to be like, 40% apparently told the Turnbull Times the year ended up being worse than they expected. The year basically as planned, 31%. And apparently, a quarter of people had a better year than they expected. So again, who knows? But let's just take the 31% that were like, yeah, kind of went the way that I thought. You split it down the middle. Again, you end up in a scenario where more than half had a negative view about the past 12 months. But then let's span it out to the past 3 years. Now, again, these numbers do not tell you that the government that has been handsomely re-elected is flying as high in the polls as they are, but they are. Only 26% of people say they're better off than they were 3 years ago. 42% of people saying they're worse off, 32% of people shrugging and saying, next question, please. Interestingly, who are the people that are worse off? 38% of Greens compared to 33% who say they're better off. 41% of coalition voters who say they are worse off than 3 years ago. But even a third of Labor supporters, and this is what matters, a third of Labor supporters say they're worse off than they were 3 years ago. Well, their team's been in power for all of that 3 years. So it makes sense that coalition people, either that their life has got worse or they feel it because it's not who they voted for. It's surprising when it comes to the Greens because, of course, their preferences go to Labor, and everyone outside of that pot, 61%, and remember, a big bulk of that is One Nation. Some of it is Tiffany Teal. Some of it is some leftovers of the Trumpeter Patriots, but still a big number, 61%. So there is some opportunity and is some growth for those who want to take on the government in the next 12 months. May they have a more successful time than they have had this year.